Hi, I'm Laura Gorman, and welcome to my thesis presentation titled Occupational Therapy Program Components for Secondary Teacher Mental Health, a Pilot Study. This pilot study addresses the lack of mental health programs for teachers in secondary schools. The purpose of this pilot study is to develop interactive, real-world applications of mental health education for secondary school teachers to improve their own mental health in order to reduce stress and burnout from job responsibilities. The participants included 4 high school teachers from various states in the United States who taught an array of subjects. Each participant engaged in a 6-week study. One educational session on a mental health topic was sent via email each week. Each session ended with interventions to use as homework to implement learning into their own routine the following week. The data was collected through qualitative surveys with open-ended questions by identifying themes to determine the program components that were perceived to be the most effective and how. The themes identified the occupational interventions that were perceived to be the most effective were those that did not require any additional time from the teachers. These included breathing exercises, meditation and quiet time, and 1-sentence journaling. These findings benefit occupational therapy practitioners who work in the school system by offering services unique to this population, as well as administration, teachers, and students who are directly in contact with teachers every day. Before I go into further depth of my thesis and how it was developed, I first want to thank a couple people. Dr. Robert Mullaney is my committee chair. He guided me into not only carrying out the research, but also developing my thoughts from the very beginning all the way to the very end. And then I also want to thank Mr. Sedman Hopkins, who helped me edit my paper and make sure that my APA formatting was where it needed to be. And then Dr. Stacy Cunningham, she has been there for me both in the classroom and outside of the classroom as I navigated my own mental health challenges in grad school. And then all secondary teachers, COVID has really thrown a lot of you for a loop, and you guys have done a lot without skipping a beat and making sure that you always take care of your kids, regardless of if it's COVID or anything like that. I just thought it was a really prime example of how well you guys put your students first. And then my personal supports, my husband, who has edited everything, has helped me develop my own passion and help me support me in doing that. And then my parents for always believing in me. So the literature review that helped me develop my project, there were themes in which I determined as I went through my literature to help me further focus on what secondary teachers were going through as mental health and kind of what had already been done. So there is a lot of research to suggest that teachers have a increased sense of responsibility, and with that comes an increased sense of burden. So the student-teacher relationship is impactful for student outcomes, and you'll see that even in my research that teachers really focus on creating that one-on-one relationship in order to get students to achieve higher levels. And it also was found to have a direct effect on the student dropout rate by Holland et al. And so what they found is that students who dropped out of high school were more likely to note that they didn't have a positive relationship with a teacher versus those who had considered dropping out and then stayed. Many of them stayed because they had one teacher that they felt believed in them or had a positive relationship with them. So really that speaks volumes to the relationship that teachers build with students, but also it puts some extra pressure on that teacher to build each of those relationships every year with students. Often the primary contact for more than one student due to the lack of communication with other professionals on the caseload is normally the teacher. So there may not be mental health professionals on the caseload for special education kids or even kids that occupational therapists work with directly. And so the teacher is the one who is giving a lot of information and doing a lot of the extra paperwork and being the contact between the parent and the school more times than not. Burnout and stress was noted to be at an all-time high through several different studies as well. It was found to be moderately high in secondary school teachers due to the demands of the job and the need for individualized planning of the curriculum delivery to students with diverse needs, because we always talk about how we can individualize education for every student and that nothing is cookie cutter, but that puts that demand back on that one teacher. Many class sizes are increasing, and so instead of having a small class size of 15 or 20, many of these teachers are teaching 30 and 35 kids at a time, and to individualize their lesson for every single student can be exhausting every day. It has been found that the burnout and stress can be reduced or even delayed with mental health interventions. And so that is where my program kind of started, was what are those interventions that can help teachers delay them. School factors and constructs were developed, and this one really was just about policies and the cultures that are developed within schools. And so the big one was the toxic culture that was noted in a lot of studies, and that teachers felt that if they worked longer days, it meant that you cared more about students. And there was almost like an unspoken rule that if you left at contract time, that you must not care about your students. And the thing that really stuck out in all these studies was that the administration modeled that unhealthy behavior and then fostered it to say, well, we need to develop this and we need to improve this. And your lesson is never good enough because you can always reach another kid, or you can always diversify it again. And so that critical thinking is part of the culture that's been developed in schools in general, but even more so as you get to the secondary level schools, because you're developing these kids and sending them off into the real world very soon. Personal accounts and experiences from teachers, and this is just people who had journaled or who had shared and recounted their experiences. The word that really stuck out was that teachers are victims of secondary trauma stress. And a lot of teachers don't know what this is. They didn't know it had a name, but a lot of them have experienced it. And basically what it is teachers guide students through a lot of very life-changing experiences and things that can be very traumatic. And although the teacher themselves are not experiencing it on a day-to-day basis, by guiding the student through it, you are taking on feelings from the situation. And you worry about the student, or you worry about the other people involved and where your hands are maybe tied, or you come across as some red tape. And so that personal accounts and experience, that feeling of worry and I don't know what to do, or who else can I reach out to, and things like that, that is called secondary trauma stress. And every teacher is a victim to that, whether they intentionally realize it or not, because you deal with students every day and you help them navigate challenges in their life. Existing programs that currently exist are the WISE program, and this is just where teachers are used to help deliver mental health services to students. And there can be a teacher component to it, but the training is very limited. And it doesn't focus on teacher outcomes, it focuses on student outcomes through the effectiveness of the teaching. And so it's just, again, adding something to the teacher's plate, and it gives them an opportunity to learn, but doesn't give them an opportunity to implement in their own lives and see their own outcomes. It focuses on student outcomes. Mindfulness, self-care, and self-compassion are the three big interventions that have been focused on for teacher mental health. These are tools that have been evaluated to be helpful to reduce burnout, and they're specific to other disciplines, but there's nothing specific to occupational therapy. And so that is where, again, my study really wanted to focus on how can occupational therapy help and work hand in hand, and not necessarily a psychology route or an education route. It was more on the focus of the teacher and their mental health. And then SWEET calls for extending the same grace to yourself as you do your students, and that's that self-compassion component that I put at the very end of my study for a reason, to remind teachers that, hey, look, you do all these great things for students, but don't forget about yourself. And I think that's what SWEET was trying to echo in her publication. So professional learning, it's been found to increase confidence in teachers and the abilities for leadership to developing their own professional identity, but it also calls for administration support. So that's kind of where my approach came from, is like an educational session, is because it enhanced professional learning of their own mental health. And I added an administration question, if they felt that their administration was going to be supportive or is supportive. And that is where this study can kind of further itself, is reaching out to administration to better help, because there are other previous studies to suggest that the administration can better support teachers, but we need to figure out how, and this study was used to inform how. So what was my research question? My research question really just wanted to learn what mental health interventions were perceived to be effective for secondary school teachers, and that it investigated strategies such as mindfulness, self-care, self-compassion, reflection, time management, and relationship building with administration and peers. Those identified should be considered as occupational therapy program development specific to teachers in the secondary school population. So what we wanted to do was identify which strategies were perceived to be the most effective and how, and what did teachers aim to understand. And then we would use them to further develop occupational therapy scope of practice by developing a program specific to secondary school teachers. So I had my IRB approved around November 2020. At the beginning of January, I sent out 9 requests to teachers. I had 6 consent forms returned, but only 4 active participants. One of my participants had to withdraw because she was no longer going to be attending school on a regular basis due to a health concern. And then another one of my participants just chose not to respond to emails. And so that is where I had the 4 active, and then my 2 who either withdrew or were not actively participating. That's where my 6 came from. All 6 of the educational sessions were sent via email, 1 per week with a YouTube link. And it included an educational session on each topic. So we had self-care and intro was week 1. Mindfulness and meditation was week 2. Week 3 was building relationships. Week 4 was reflection. Week 5 was self-compassion. And week 6 was a review or a summary. And it allowed for me to kind of evaluate what was effective and share it with my participants moving forward, in hopes that they would continue to implement interventions in their routine. At the end of each email, with the first thing being the link, the next thing was that they had a link to a survey, and their survey was to collect data through open-ended questions about their homework assignment the previous week. And that homework assignment was for them to implement their learning. So they had to choose, for example, week 1. They had to choose an area of self-care that they felt was either really stimulated, overstimulated, or understimulated. And then they had to choose a way to help either balance, to bring it back to balance. And then I gave them a list of ideas on ways to do that for each one, and hoped that it would also help spark their own ideas. And then they were to report back what was effective and what they were able to implement. And then I also asked about challenges as well. The last email included a summary survey in order for them to give me feedback on the overall effectiveness of the entire program. And then once all the surveys were completed, I compiled each one of their answers into their own separate Word document. The Word document was then emailed back to them, and they had an opportunity to correct or to add to or even delete part of their answers. And then they were to send that back to me via email with this statement: I verify that this information on the attached document is an accurate record of my answers for the research questions collected throughout the study. And that email is kept on file as well. So overall, the 4 teachers, 3 of them had experience of 6 to 10 years, and then 1 of them had experience of 0 to 5 years. And so that was kind of important to note, because within those 5 years of teaching, there's a lot of learning going on still within developing a routine and your own teaching style, and then the added pressure of just being new to a job. The subjects taught, all four of them taught different subjects. So one taught physical education, one taught special education, one taught math, and one taught social studies. And then the different areas that they were in, three of them were in suburban schools located either in Texas or in Tennessee. And then one of them was in a rural school located in Wisconsin. So the findings, I broke them down into kind of what happened each week because each educational session had its own survey. So after week one, we found that the self-care homework, we found that the most neglected domain by 3 out of 4 teachers was the physical domain. And we found that the most stimulated domain was the social domain. And again, that was out of 3 out of 4 teachers. All of them reported using some form of quiet time, either through reading, leaving at contract time, or walking in the halls during a break, kind of like in their own time in order to help alleviate some of that overstimulation of the social time. And while also incorporating some of the physical stuff. And so the benefits that they had noted was, and these are their words from the survey, it helped them blow off steam, it helped them melt away stress, it helped them distract themselves from work so they could better clear their mind. And then the challenge overall was time. And the words used were turning off work was difficult and led to a lot of feelings of guilt, or I should be doing this, or I should be doing that. And you can see here, there's a lot of studies that support that finding, and it's really about the culture of teaching and that school construct of what has come to be the culture of the occupation of teaching. Week 2 was on mindfulness and meditation, and all participants chose to use breathing exercises. I thought that was pretty interesting, even given the choice of yoga or just meditation and 10-minute meditation videos on YouTube. I sent a lot of links. They chose to use some form of breathing exercise. So they chose, one participant chose the Calm app, and another 2 participants chose the Fitbit or the smartwatch relaxation that you had on your watch. One chose figure 8 breathing, and figure 8 breathing was noted to be beneficial because it kept the hands busy and engaged the mind to keep it from wandering to those feelings of guilt, or those thoughts of this is what I should be doing and this is what I'm not doing. And so it helped kind of refocus, just like a meditation would, but was done through a simple 1 or 2 minute activity. The breathing component of interventions like yoga and mindfulness were found to be beneficial by Fluke and by Harris, but they didn't ever look at anything with just breathing exercises. So I thought it was really interesting that the teachers chose just that breathing component, even when given the choice of yoga or meditation. They really just focused on that breathing. The benefits were perceived to be more present throughout the day. They were able to breathe easier with the mask. I think this is because of COVID. Teachers are struggling to even talk through the mask. And so by taking time to breathe and really take that deep breath and allow themselves to relax, they felt that they were able to breathe a little easier. And then it also helped them clear that mind. I told you to keep them from being distracted of I should be doing this, or I should have these feelings of this. It almost combated some of the culture that we've talked about before. And again, every week the challenge was noted to be time and how can I fit this into an already packed schedule. So week 3, the focus was building relationships. What teachers said that they had implemented were being more intentional with their students, kind of asking hey, I saw you had a sports game last night. How did it go? And just being very intentional with the conversations that they were having with students. Some even called a peer or socialized at lunch. And one even did a small act of kindness or appreciation for a fellow teacher. And the benefits were noted to be feelings of accomplishment when a student was successful, being intentional and celebrating that little moment with them. Teachers felt that accomplishment through their students, so that was pretty cool. Stress relief when socializing or venting to peers. And then feelings of joy when appreciating others. So just that small act of kindness helped them see that not everything had to be so negative throughout the day. And being able to appreciate others made them feel good about themselves. The challenge was, again, kind of that toxic environment of teaching, and that the anxiety of I should be doing this instead of this, or the consequence of the culture. And that I thought it was interesting that one participant had noted that they felt the administration was too overwhelmed with student problems, and they felt like they were being a burden by coming to the administration. And so they had noted that the teacher's mental health appeared to be, in their words, falling through the cracks. Again, that circles back to the literature review of that personal responsibility, that personal burden. You kind of feel it in more ways than just dealing with students. Week 4 was all about reflection, and what was used was very similar to what was used in week 1 when given the choice. Reflection was about meditation, quiet moments in the morning, and then one sentence journaling. And some of them, the benefits noted were to find more positives throughout the day, clear their mind, and combat occupational burnout and stress. But the challenge was time. And it was funny reading to some degree, because reading the answers, because one participant said, I kept falling asleep. It was so quiet and I was so relaxed that I had no problem falling asleep. And that just speaks volumes to the stress and the amount of time that teachers are putting into their job and how much they really do care. That 3 minutes of quiet time here or there is helping them fall asleep. And then the challenge was to find like proud moments each day, because they often found themselves, in their words, in survival mode and going through the motions, just trying to make it to the next day. And these are very characteristic of burnout and being exhausted. So week 5 is where I chose to focus on self-compassion. We talked about how teachers have a lot of grace towards students and helping them navigate challenges of life, even after they make mistakes, but are very critical of themselves, and that cultural component of how can I better this, or what can I do better to reach this student, or I'm struggling to reach this, can I do this? How can I improve my lesson? And they really focused always on the negative. And so we talked a lot about that. And so this is what was interesting to me, is teachers allowed themselves to take time for self-care activities. That was part of their way of choosing to show self-compassion, is giving themselves time to be a person outside of a teacher. They gave themselves permission to take short moments during the day for themselves, to be a little selfish to some degree. And they set boundaries. This quote was interesting from one of the participants. Teachers could work 24/7 in this pandemic world, but it's nice to be reminded that I don't have to. I think that speaks volumes to how much a teacher really does care and does put themselves kind of on the back burner. But we foster that environment in the teaching world. So the big challenge was combating those feelings of guilt. Should I be doing this for myself when I could be improving this lesson, or I could be doing this for a student, or I could be, grading papers, and so it was combating those feelings of guilt. Again, it goes back to that culture. So if you want others to be happy, you want to practice compassion. If you want to be happy, you also have to practice compassion. And I think this is something that teachers do really well. They have a lot of compassion for others, but they always put themselves on the back burners. And so I think it's really important to incorporate self-compassion into a occupational therapy program development. So overall, my summary findings were that the experience they found to be positive through the entire reminder of mental health aspects. Choice was perceived to be, the choice provided helped them perceive interventions to reduce stress and anxiety, have a clear mind, and have feelings of rejuvenation of one's work, being able to kind of delay the burnout, not completely take it away. The number one challenge noted was time. How do I find time for anything else in an already packed schedule? The other one was combating just kind of like those cultural components of teaching and like the feelings of guilt, like I should be doing this or I should be improving this. And then the other challenge was finding that work-life balance. What is appropriate for me to do during the school day for myself, and what is appropriate for me to take home from the school day? And finding that balance was hard. So overall, mindfulness and meditation interventions are the most sustainable and beneficial in the immediate time. So it allowed for the acknowledgement of the unreasonable pace to be kept. Like one teacher had noted that they started the year at an unreasonably high pace and they were not able to keep it without burning out. It also allowed for meditation or quiet time to help find positives to kind of combat that and balance that out. One sentence journaling was provided as like a check-in, but the overall like best component noted was to be the meditation or quiet time. So the takeaway lessons were, hey, the acknowledgement that there was a lack of self-care, acknowledging that their mental health was actually struggling even though they didn't know that it was, and that this quote was interesting: taking care of my own mental health helps me take care of others, and that they felt that they were more intentional with students and had more energy in the classroom and were more rejuvenated in their work because they had taken just a few moments to help take care of their mental health. And then one teacher had noted that there were a lot more tools to help intervene and not accept the ruts of teaching as normal characteristics of the job. And again, I think that speaks to the culture that teaching has fostered. So overall, the analysis is that mental health programs do support teachers, and they do help teachers reduce stress and anxiety and delay burnout. We can never fully do away with burnout, but we can delay it. And that's helpful in setting boundaries to balance that work-life balance, reducing stress, anxiety, and increase their confidence in their job as well. Breathing exercise and quiet time allowed for clear thinking, positive acknowledgments of what had happened during the day, and coping with the high demands of the job. And why were the interventions chosen? Why did teachers choose these interventions? And everything points to the fact that they're easily accessible and they require little time. So by using the smartwatch or the Fitbit or an app to help them remember, like, hey, I need to take a moment for myself and I need to focus on me. It's all right there. It's easily accessible. It doesn't take a lot of time. One sentence journaling doesn't take a lot of time. Having lunch with a friend, lunch is kind of built in. That takes a little bit more time, and that's where those feelings of guilt start to sink in a little bit more. But maybe once a week we can balance it and we can kind of figure out how to do it. Again, easily accessible. It's already built in. So building relationships, student relationships were perceived to be the most positive impact on teachers' mental health, but peers for social and administration relationships appeared to have some type of negative impact. Again, those feelings of guilt were sinking in. They struggled to ask for help because they didn't want to be judged, because again, that culture is fostering, well, if you're struggling, then you're probably not helping your students as much as you should be, and things like that. So the different methods allowed, like the asynchronous method allowed for the interventions to be client-centered by giving them choice, allowing them to access it when they did have time. Every single one of the sessions was under 15 minutes, including the very last one, which was a review. And so by keeping them short and to the point, teachers didn't feel like, oh, I have to watch a 45-minute segment and build time for that. It was something that they could do during their conference period. It was something that they could do at home if they chose to do that. And then they could kind of think about how to incorporate it. One teacher had told me in an email that the best way that they could incorporate the study was by doing it and completing the video on Sunday. And then it also helped to remind them throughout the week that, hey, this is something I need to be considering for myself. And then the support for the use of self-care activities, it helped improve time management for teachers, helped improve their self-compassion, and overall improved their entire mental health. So what does this mean going forward? Well, we need to remain client-centered in our interventions. We need to give them the power to choose of when, how, and where, which we talked about. That's how the asynchronous delivery was chosen. We need to provide education on mental health topics that are relevant to this occupation so that teachers don't feel like they are alone on an island. It allows for them to relate to others, and it allows for them to know that this is okay for me to feel this way. It doesn't make me any less of a teacher or a good teacher. That the culture should always be improving, that teachers feel the pressure. It leads to feelings of defeat and feelings of lack of self-compassion and always being critical in oneself. And so that's the picture on the side of the slide where it says, hey, brain, look. And it's saying like, there's all these good things to look at in your heart, but then your brain is sitting there going, wow, I can't look at all of those good things because I'm really focused on this bad thing. And that is a picture that I used in my educational session to kind of get the point across that there really are all these positives, but we always look for ways to improve, and to find the way to improve, you always have to find the one negative, even though we need to acknowledge all or the many positives. Mindfulness, self-compassion, and reflection can all help. So we need to find ways to incorporate those interventions for mental health programs for teachers in order to combat that culture of always having to improve. So it can delay or reduce stress, anxiety, and burnout. When it's accompanied with peer mentors and administration support, it's found to be even more effective. Through the literature review, and that is where the study can go. That's where our further research can kind of use to support that. And then the administration support is needed because when you're dealing with a lot of the traumatic events that students deal with, you need support, not only to help them best, but also to help yourself through it. So the limitations and bias for this study, the limitation is that it's a really small sample size. It's only 4, and that's why it's a pilot study. There's no specific subject area or geographic location for where the school is at, and so that can change school to school. Some schools may foster a completely different culture. Some administration may be a lot more supportive, and so that can definitely change the outcomes of the study. So we need to note those limitations. The bias is that basically every single person involved, including both committee members and myself, have had some type of career in academia. And so I used to be a secondary teacher, and so I have a lot of family who are in secondary schools, including my husband. And then both committee members are professors at universities, and so they understand what it is like to have all the demands of teaching on their job. And I thought this quote actually spoke a lot to the culture of teaching. It says, "A good teacher is like a candle. It consumes itself to light the way for others." And I think it speaks to the culture of teaching in that the teacher always gets put on the back burner, but it also speaks to the fact that teachers have such a big heart and always put others first. And that is why I think it's super important that there are programs out there developed specifically for them to help them say that it's okay to take some time for you. And that's kind of leads us into our implications for OT practice. So really it's okay for us to develop that program specific to teachers to help them. And by helping them, they want to help others. And so in turn, we're helping them help others. It also allows us to increase our scope of practice for OT because this is not a population that we currently serve. And so it allows us to maybe go into a consultant role with administration on how they can help, or even specific districts or specific counties on how they can help. And it lets us look more at a preventative measure instead of a reactive measure. So in summary, the Foundation for Teacher Mental Health Programs is what this study serves to be. It serves to be a foundation in order to help OT kind of develop programs for them, specific to the population. The interventions that were perceived to be the most beneficial included meditation and mindfulness through breathing exercises, reflection through one-sentence journaling, and then building relationships with students. And then if we can change the culture, I think administration support can also help as well. Teachers reported appreciating finding positives to cope with the demands and saying, hey, like, here is all the good that happens during your day, and trying to combat that culture of always focusing on improving and finding that negative to improve on. And then OT interventions to consider should include quiet time, such as meditation, journaling activities that are quick and to the point, and then socialization with peers, and just trying to foster those relationships, because I think teachers already do a really good job with fostering those relationships with their students. We talked about this a little bit, but suggestions for future research and practice are to inform this study can inform larger studies. They can consider the use of quantitative measures to determine to what extent stress, burnout, and anxiety are reduced. Both formal and informal assessment should be considered with that. So it could be something that you also collaborate with other disciplines on, including like psychology or maybe even physiology, like a physical component, to where you can do blood work to see if like cortisol levels are increased, or if endorphins are released. And so you can collaborate with others to further figure out to what extent the stress, anxiety, or burnout are reduced. And then it allows for us to consider the expansion of OT practice into that consultation role, with targeting one specific area and finding their problems or ways that they can support teachers unique to that population. So if there are any questions or you have any feedback for me, I would greatly appreciate it if you could email me. My email is listed right there. And thank you all for coming. I really enjoyed doing this thesis project because I felt like I was making a difference in a time where teachers felt like they were being very underappreciated through the times of COVID. And so it was really nice to be able to connect with people, even though we couldn't all be in the same place. And it was really nice to see some positive feedback through a virtual experience, as one teacher noted in an email. So I appreciate giving me the opportunity to complete this study. And this slide and the next slide are all of my references. So I look forward to entertaining your questions, and I hope you all enjoyed my presentation.